I have a number of Texas senators here with us today that came up that serve in the Senate, and I wish they all were as prompt and listened as quickly as you all just did right there. That's pretty good. So. We have Senator Hagenbu, who's a Naval Academy graduate. You want to just raise your hand there, Senator? Thank you for your service. We have Senator Joan Huffman, Senator Huffman. We have Senator Lois Kolkhorst. We have Senator Mays Middleton. I think he stepped out. Adam Hinojosa, thank you. And we have a few would-be's, maybe, here. So it's good to have you all here. All right. So we're going to continue with our testimony. And our next panel up is Mike Berry and Second Lieutenant Harish Rao, who is going to go first. Harish, you're
up. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Chairman and the panel. Okay. Thank you for allowing me to speak on the importance of Hindu religions in the US military. My testimony is not a shape of only by my faith, but also by personal experience through as a soldier who lived both challenges and extraordinary support from the Chaplain Corps. I will speak on the three areas: respect and recognition of Hindu religious symbols such as Tilak Chalo, understanding and accommodating Hindu vegetarian diet, discipline including avoiding tamasic food, expanding chaplain endorsement opportunities, including support for Hindu chaplaincy. Before I begin this point, I want to share my own story. I joined the Army in 2015. During my basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, I faced significant challenges because my chain of command did not understand my religious practice, especially a tilak chalo I wear on my forehead. I was told that if I want to keep wearing my tilak chalo, I'll be deported back to India. I was removed from the training and placed among the non-trainers. One day, a chaplain walked by and asked each of us why we did not want to be a soldier. And when my turn came, I explained, if I was not allowed to keep my faith and practice my religion, then what exactly I'm defending? I told him, I have been instructed that I will be deported, and now I'm just waiting for the process. The chaplain then asked me two questions that changed my life. First, does your religious practice affect your training? I said no. Second, if you're permitted to practice your faith, do you still want to be served? I said yes, absolutely. That chaplain stood for me. He spoke to my drill sergeant, first sergeant, and company commander. He explained clearly that I have a right to practice my religion. He arranged for me to be transferred to another unit, gave me a memo of recommended religious accommodation, and make sure I continue my training. Before I moved to AIT, Advanced Individual Training, at Fort Lee, Virginia, I asked what will happen if I face the similar issue. The chaplain then contacted to Fort Lee chaplain and told me to always keep the memo with me. Because of that support, I successfully completed my advanced individual training with no problem, and even earned 2 certificates of achievements, one for leadership as a squad leader and another for a class leader. This experience shaped me profoundly. My first topic was Tilak Chalo as a practiced religious faith. The Tilak Chalo is not just a symbol, it is central to my identity as a Swaminarayan Hindu. The Tilak, that is a thin line U-shape from my forehead to eyebrows, represents God's feet, that is purity, and a chalo, a red dot in the center, symbolizes a devotion by the devotee. And it's a twofold combination of a devotee offering service in the feet of God. Across Hindu tradition, there are similar symbols, whereas in shape, size, and color, depending on the deity and lineage to the devotee follow. But in 2015, it nearly removed me from the army. Today, I'm speaking so future Hindu soldier never face the same experience. Recognition the Tilak Chalo and other Hindu faith symbols, as long as they do not interfere with the training and the safety. ensure soldiers can serve authentically and proudly. My second topic was Hindu dietary practices as a pure vegetarianism and avoiding of tamasic food. Many Hindu, especially those in Swaminarayan Sampradaya, Vaishnav, and Jain, follow strict vegetarian. That means they don't eat no meat, no seafood, no eggs, no even in among the vegetables, no onion and no garlic. Onion and garlic are considered tamasic food in the Hindu philosophy. Refers to the quality of promote. It refers to qualify to promote anger, agitation, lack of focus, and spiritual dullness. Because Hindu spiritual emphasizes mental clarity, purity of thought, and emotional control. Avoiding onion and garlic is deeply religious practice, not a personal preference. Service member following this discipline require pure vegetarian meal, no egg content, and alternatives during the field exercise. Even when it comes to vaccination, many Hindu prefer egg-free or preservative-free version when available, such as cell-based vaccines. This allows soldiers to maintain readiness while respecting sincerely held beliefs. Understanding these dietary principles ensure Hindu soldiers remain healthy, focused, and spiritually grounded without compromising mission readiness. And my third topic was expanding Hindu chaplains' endorsement opportunities. During my assignment at the 18 MedCode 4th Chapter Hawaii, Chaplain Benegin, and under the leadership of Colonel San Martinos, supported me deeply. We created a 7-day interfaith pilgrimage to the Big Island for all enlisted and below soldiers, learning Hawaiian, Christian, and Hindu faith. That experience was so successful that I brought that idea to the president of BOSS program, that stands for Better Opportunity for Single Soldiers, which then expanded in statewide across the military branch. But I soon realized a bigger issue. There are very few Hindu chaplains, even though many serves Hindu members across the military branch. In 2022, I learned about an airman, Darshan Shah, who waited nearly 2 years to get religious accommodation. Cases like this and my own shows how much we need chaplain who understand Hindu faith and tradition. This past summer, during CST, Cadet Summer Training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, a chaplain approached me and asked me if I consider to be a Hindu chaplain, mentioning that the Army is actively looking to hire. On September 26th, I was commissioned as a logistic officer. And now I feel called to pursue the chaplain corps because a chaplain stood up for me, and now I want to do the same thing for other soldiers. I also want to emphasize that a BAPS Swaminarayan Sanstha, a global Hindu organization which is strongly leadership structure, is fully and willingly ready to become one of the endorsers for the Hindu chaplains if given the opportunity. This will signify expand pathways for Hindu soldiers seeking spiritual support. My journey from almost being removed from the army to become an officer, aspiring to join the chaplain corps, proves the power of religious liberty and the importance of understanding. In the military, can ensure that no service the US military can ensure that no service member must choose between the faith and service. The Army gave me the chance to serve something bigger than myself. Now, I hope to help ensure that every Hindu soldier, present and future, can serve with dignity, confidence, and devotion. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thanks, sir. Members of the committee, we're going to go back to our format like we've had before. We'll have both witnesses give their 6 or 7 minutes, and then we'll ask both questions. So, Michael?
Chairman Patrick, distinguished commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to testify on religious liberty in the military. We've heard this morning from a diverse group of patriots, and although we may differ in appearance, speech, and religious belief, we are united in our commitment to a cause that is much greater than ourselves, our oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. Having served both in uniform as a constitutional attorney, I offer this testimony as a recognized expert on religious liberty in the military. But I'm also here today as one who has experienced the very religious hostility that I've dedicated much of my professional career to eradicating within our military. My path to service began in the immediate aftermath of the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. Our nation was hurting, and I knew I had to do something. My faith in God and my love of America motivated me to join the United States Marine Corps. Becoming a Marine Corps officer remains one of my life's greatest achievements. I love being a Marine, and I love serving with Marines. But I'm also a proud Texan. And like any good Texan, I often daydreamed about returning to the Lone Star State. Unfortunately, there are no Marine Corps bases in Texas. Now, there are a lot of Air Force bases in Texas, so I thought briefly about transferring to the Air Force, but my wife, who is here, says that those Air Force uniforms just don't have the same effect as our Marine Corps dress blues. In 2013, I left active duty to join First Liberty Institute, where I get to fight for religious freedom every day. I have often quipped that I'm still upholding and defending the Constitution. I just wear a different uniform, and I have even less hair than I did when I was in the Marines. But I remained in the Marine Corps Reserve because of my desire to continue serving our great nation. By 2021, I had nearly 2 decades of service that included a combat deployment to Afghanistan, a tour as a professor of law at the U.S. Naval Academy, and enough memories and friendships to last a lifetime. I could also see the opportunity to retire just over the horizon. But 2021 is also when the previous administration imposed the COVID vaccine mandate on our military. Like tens of thousands of my uniformed colleagues, I had a sincere religious objection to the COVID vaccine. As a religious liberty attorney, I knew the law permitted me to request a religious accommodation, which I dutifully submitted. My immediate chain of command enthusiastically endorsed my request, all but pleading with higher echelon authorities to approve my religious accommodation so that I could continue to serve. But, like tens of thousands of my uniformed colleagues, my religious accommodation fell upon deaf ears, and what we soon learned was a rubber stamp process. It was denied. Then, without warning, notice, or an opportunity for my command to intervene, the Marine Corps unceremoniously placed me into inactive status. This meant that I was no longer a part of my unit, and I could no longer perform my reserve duties to earn credit towards my military retirement. The manner in which I discovered that I'd been placed on inactive status defies the basic decency and respect that we should provide to those who serve our nation. I only learned of my removal to inactive status when I was notified by TRICARE. TRICARE is the military's healthcare insurance provider, who notified me that my family was no longer eligible for coverage. For many families, this would present a problem. For my family, this created a crisis. My wife and I have 4 children. We adopted our oldest daughter, Emma, from China. Emma has a severe permanent disability that requires significant medical care and costs. She was left at an orphanage as a newborn because in China, those with severe disabilities are often considered undesirable. Losing TRICARE without warning or notice plunged my family into immediate financial turmoil. We now had to pay for Emma's substantial medical bills out of pocket. Meanwhile, my attempts to appeal the Marine Corps' decision were dismissed. I even received an email from a senior Marine Corps official stating that because I was unvaccinated, I, quote, had interests adverse to the United States, end quote. The message was clear. It was me and my religious beliefs that motivated me to serve in the first place that were now undesirable. But if the Marine Corps taught me anything, it's how to fight. And fight we did. Over the next 2 years, I would twice be involuntarily removed to inactive status. Each time, I fought my way back in. A friend referred to me as a nuclear cockroach. I just couldn't die. Today, I'm still a proud Marine Corps reservist. I will never be promoted again. That was made very clear to me the day I submitted my religious accommodation. And my retirement is now approximately 2 years delayed. But I didn't join the Marines so that I could acquire a particular rank or even a pension check. I joined because like each of us here this morning, I wanted to make a difference. People often ask me how we got to this point, or perhaps more importantly, how do we fix it? I think that's why this hearing is so vitally important. If I had to summarize what the Commission needs to take away from this hearing, it would be that religious liberty within the military isn't merely an esoteric concept. It's not a punchline or a cliche. It is a matter of national security. Fortunately, our nation has a strong historical and legal basis for upholding religious liberty within the military. For over 50 years, America's military has been an all-volunteer force. We ended the draft in 1973. Sustaining an all-volunteer force means that enough young people in our country decide that military service presents an attractive alternative to college, vocation, or some other pursuit. People join the military for many reasons. Studies show that young Americans who identify as highly religious are substantially more likely to join the military than their non-religious counterparts. So the clear implication is this: if our military becomes hostile to faith, recruiting and retention will suffer, and our military will become soft and weak. History confirms this. From George Washington requesting chaplains for his troops, to Congress mandating divine services, as we heard this morning from David, to President Roosevelt ensuring Bibles were distributed during World War II, as we also heard from David. Our leaders have always recognized that spiritual fitness strengthens military readiness. After World War II, a presidential commission on religion in the military, perhaps similar to this one, concluded that religious conviction is the source of America's moral strength, and it is essential to preparing our forces ideologically as well as physically. Legally speaking, our courts agree. In one case, a federal court held that the Constitution obligates Congress to make religion available to service members, especially those who are deployed where their faith communities are not readily accessible. And in a separate case, another federal court affirmed that chaplains, when acting in their religious capacity, enjoy full First Amendment protections. These cases underscore that religious liberty in the military is not optional, it is required. Yet challenges persist. Commanders, chaplains, and lawyers do not receive sufficient training on the very Constitution they've sworn to uphold and defend. And what little training they do receive has been un-American, to say the least. Some training materials have labeled Catholics and evangelicals as, quote, religious extremists alongside Hamas and Al-Qaeda. That is unacceptable. If we treat deeply held beliefs as a threat, we undermine the very values of our service members are sworn to defend. So as I wrap up, I offer the Commission 3 recommendations. First, improve education and training. There are law school courses that spend entire semesters on the First Amendment. As a young Marine Corps lawyer, I received 1 hour. Commanders, chaplains, and JAGs need annual training on constitutional foundations, including religious liberty. Second, eliminate misguided materials. We have an entire generation of Americans who K through 12 has been indoctrinated that America is evil, it's racist, it's imperialist, or it's fascist. Is it any wonder that they are unwilling to sacrifice for a nation that they've been taught to hate? We must remove any content that is inconsistent with American values, and especially content that is hostile to religious liberty. And third, we must reaffirm religious liberty within the national security strategy. The Department of War develops its strategy, plans, and operations based on the President's national security strategy. We must ensure that our first freedom remains a strategic priority. So in closing, service members surrender many freedoms when they put on the uniform. Religious liberty is not one of them. If America's military is to remain the most formidable fighting force in history, we must ensure that religious liberty continues to flourish. Because at its core, religious liberty is and always has been a matter of national security. Thank you.
Thank you for both of your testimonies. Mike, let me ask you this. Do you have a sense, and I asked Blake this actually, I didn't take the time when he was a witness, but as he walked away, do you have a sense that your superior officers believe in the orders they're passing down and how you were treated? Are they just following orders? Or do you think the breakdown is somewhere between the top of the military, rising to the level of the White House under previous administrations who really took away religious liberty? Or is it somewhere lost in the higher ranks of the military? For example, we had our education hearing. We heard time and time again where principals or school board members clearly didn't know the Constitution, clearly didn't understand the First Amendment, and they were punishing teachers because they thought they were following the Constitution. So where is this emanating from? Who's the they, as Reverend Franklin said?
Well, the answer to that is somewhat twofold. On the one hand, when First Liberty, when we were litigating the Navy SEALs case, and it went to the Supreme Court for at least a portion of the case, and one of the things the Supreme Court said was, look, we need to be very deferential to the military because it occupies such a unique function and place in our society. And so we want to make sure they said it's the commanders on the ground who have the best viewpoint, the best perspective on how to operate their unit. We should be deferential to them. But the problem is they were being told by people way up in the leadership, not the commanders on the ground, like, yeah, be deferential to us, right? Just, there's nothing to see here. This rubber stamp process is legit. But when you dig into the case and you actually start looking at what the commanders on the ground were saying is, for example, in my case, my immediate commander, my immediate chain of command was screaming from the rooftops. This is literally what they said. They said, we would, if Mike gets COVID, right? If Lieutenant Colonel Barry gets COVID, he's quarantined for 2 weeks. So we lose him for 2 weeks, which is not great, but okay, we can deal with that. But if you kick him out, we lose him permanently. And I'll think about that in the context of Navy SEALs, who, I mean, Blake can speak to how many years and how many millions of dollars of training go into just creating one Navy SEAL, and you're gonna get rid of them. It's not just that you've gotten rid of that SEAL, it's the replacement cost now, right? And the experience, I mean, we don't have a generation who are entering the military service right now who are gonna be going off and fighting in Iraq, Afghanistan, and places like that. And so it's the warfighters who have that experience and that they can pass on to future generations. They were the ones that were being cut out. So to answer your question, Mr. Chairman, the senior echelons in the military, they were the ones who, the phrase I coined was they were far more concerned with COVID compliance than they were with constitutional compliance. They wanted to make sure that when they received what we call an alpha roster, right? It's just the roster of everyone in their command, and the commanders would compete with each other. Well, my unit has 99.8% COVID compliance, vaccine compliance. And the guy would say, all right, that's it. I want 99.9% in my unit. And so they would, and the Marine Corps would brag. They would literally brag about no religious accommodations because they thought it was somehow like we're saving the world because we're making sure everybody's getting vaccinated. And they would not listen to, the saying, follow the science. When we presented evidence about this thing called natural immunity, which is like, when I was growing up, if a kid got chickenpox, you sent him home for a week and he came back and it's like, well, he doesn't need the chickenpox vaccine because he just had chickenpox. Well, it's kind of the same thing with other illnesses. If you just came back and you have COVID, all the medical doctors, I went to a doctor and they said, well, you're showing a significant presence of COVID antibodies in your blood. Like, what the medical term is, the vaccine will be contraindicated. In other words, like, we advise against getting it because it's going to do more harm than good to you. The military just said, no, you have to get it because we have been ordered from the President and the Secretary of Defense, 100% compliance.
And Harish, your thoughts of where this is all coming from in your experiences?
So about are you sir asking about the vaccine?
Yeah, about where these orders are coming down to you in your experience of where you were denied your religious liberty. So not necessarily the vaccine, yours was a little different, but you said you had the one chaplain that helped you and you eventually became a Hindu chaplain. But where did that resistance come from? Was it within the ranks or you think above the?
Sir, I think it's like the company level because chaplain, I understand there are very few Hindu soldiers in the military, and those who want to follow their practices are like very less. So even the minority consider we are minority, and so there are different deities and different ways to follow. So I can understand that if they don't know, if my chain of command or drill sergeant approach to chaplain and ask that, hey, we have one of the soldier, can you look into it if he can continue? But I think they say, what's on your forehead? We are not allow you. So I think at the entry level, that's what from my experience. And those chaplain who don't understand because they are not familiar with this kind of situation, they ask me like how we can find the information and contact. So what I provide to them, the websites and personal number. So they reach out to them and they confirm with what's going on, and then they give me the memo. So every unit when I transfer to it in my military, active or reserve, my first day at my briefing, I just showed to my company commander that I need sign. So I have to keep every unit I'm just transferring to. So my question is like, I'm trying to, if goes across the army wise or the military wise, it's making easy for the future soldiers so that they can continue without any kind of issue, sir.
Any questions, comments? Yes, Carrie?
Thank you so much, both of you, for your testimonies. Mr. Berry, I wanted to ask you, what was it like with the other servicemen and women when they heard about what was going on with you? Were they, wanting to receive the vaccine? What was the common sort of, understanding of religious exemptions? Were you aware that certain exemptions were accepted, some were denied? What was kind of going on between your peers?
So in the very early days of the vaccine, when it was simply made available, so this would have been sometime in 2021 when it became, it wasn't FDA approved, but it was offered as sort of provisionally. And there was a lot of hesitance, right? Because as information, there's a lot of great organizations out there that put a lot of information out about, in this case, it was an experimental vaccine and some of the potential negative side effects that people could suffer as a result. Just the lack of testing because it had been developed so quickly and so rapidly. And people began to reach out and say, well, initially there's different categories. There's people who are hesitant for medical reasons, which is one category. And then there are people who are hesitant for religious reasons, which is a very different category. And what was fascinating to me was how the military treated those two categories. In fact, that became one of the central arguments in the Navy SEALs litigation was the Navy had a regulation that said, if you have a medical reason why you can't get the vaccine, then you're exempt and you just continue to serve, right? You continue to serve. But if you have a religious reason why you can't get the vaccine, sorry, it's unavailing. Like you will not get that accommodation. I talked to one particular naval enlisted member who has a religious objection to all vaccines. And he was at close to 20 years. I think he was at 18 or 19 years of service. And he sent to me his documentation showing he had received a religious accommodation to, I lose count, I think it was 17 or 18 mandatory vaccinations by the Department of Defense. And it was like a big packet of essentially approvals for his religious accommodation. When the COVID vaccine became mandatory, he submitted like, oh, well, hey, I've received my religious accommodation to all 17 vaccines. Now there's an 18th. I'm requesting that one too. He sent me the documentation, so I saw it with my own eyes, and it said, your religious accommodation request for all the other 17 vaccines is approved, but not for COVID. And he was like, what's so special about COVID? Well, we all know it's so special about COVID. And so, yeah, there was a lot of skepticism, and the problem wasn't so much. So the problem the military had, I remember there was a commander of a naval vessel as well, and his situation, he was asking me, why are they doing this? And I said, the Navy doesn't have a problem with unvaccinated sailors on their ships because they have unvaccinated sailors on their ships. It's why are they unvaccinated? If you're not vaccinated for a medical reason, oh, well, that's completely understandable. We wouldn't want to, HIPAA, we don't want to get involved, But, if it's a religious reason, you are you are no longer, you're an undesirable. As I said, you're an undesirable.
Ryan?
Yeah, I just wanted to share an insight I had as Mike was answering that question. When he mentioned that for the Navy, they would grant you an exemption if it was for a medical reason, but not if it was for a religious reason. It strikes me that what that embodies is we're prioritizing physical, mortal well-being over spiritual and eternal well-being. That they actually have the hierarchy there precisely upside down. Mm-hmm. And I think that frequently happens in these religious liberty cases where we're prioritizing physical, mortal considerations above spiritual and eternal considerations. So again, I don't know how we give philosophical advice to the president, but I think that somewhere should show up in how we operationalize getting the order of priority correct.
Well, may I respond to that?
I'll phrase it as a
Briefly?
question. Yes, please.
So the vaccine mandate is not it's merely a symptom of a much deeper problem, right? The vaccine mandate wasn't the thing. It was just a manifestation of the thing. And to your point, we represented a chaplain who was giving suicide, who was tasked, he was directed by his commander, you're to give suicide prevention awareness training to your unit because you're the chaplain, that's your job. And he literally had a handout that on one side had faith-based resources for mental health issues. On the other side, it had non-faith-based, just secular, psychologists and whatnot. And he was punished for that. Why? Because one person complained and said that might offend. And to your point, Ryan, so they completely lost sight of the fact that he's trying to save lives, right? We are about saving lives. So the recommendation I would offer is to the president is we need to place spiritual fitness right up along there with physical fitness, like that it's a non-negotiable. That if we want, like in the Marines, we always joke, like if you want to get promoted, just run fast and do a lot of pull-ups and you will make colonel without, unless you object to the vaccine. Then the ability to run fast and do a lot of pull-ups, like spiritual fitness should also be right there next to that. Is like, are you spiritually fit as much as you are physically fit?
I know we have your written testimony. I want to be sure we have it. What you just said there, I think is really important somewhere in the report. We'll go back and watch the tape, but how you said that is really important. Before we let you go, how is your daughter?
That's a different story, Mr. Chair. So she just turned 21, and she lives at home with us, and what's interesting is, speaking of TRICARE, when you turn 21 and you're not a full-time student, she's not a full-time student because she's permanently disabled, they drop you from TRICARE. So, but she's doing great. We're.
And how did you handle those finances?
Through the Lord, just like we do with everything else. We just trust in the Lord, and He multiplies in ways that we can't.
If you need help, let us know. All right. Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you. We have two more panels on the military, and then Pastor Jeffress is here from First Baptist. We're going to talk about some Texas issues before we conclude at 1 o'clock. We are pretty much right on time, a few minutes behind a little bit. So our next witnesses are Veit Ali. Am I saying that right? Let me see. No, I'm sorry. We have Rabbi Dressen. I'm sorry, Rabbi. Good to see you. I looked ahead at the next panel. Excuse me. And Major General Carver. So thank you. Who wants to go first?
I defer to the general.
Oh, my.
Okay. General, he's deferring to you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, distinguished committee and guests. Thank you for this opportunity to give my public testimony about religious liberty in the armed forces. It was my humble honor to have worn the uniform for 38 years, 8 years as a field artillery officer, and 30 years as a chaplain. Appointed as the 22nd Army Chief of Chaplains during the Bush era, I asked God for a scripture that I could use during my time as the Chief of Chaplains. It was from Psalm 28, verse 9, which basically I prayed and continued to pray over the members of the armed services. Basically, Lord, save your troops, bless your troops, shepherd your troops, and carry them forever. That remains my prayer today for those who serve, have answered the call to duty. Less than 1% of our population ever wears the uniform, and so they are very, very, very important to me. And one of the important resources that exists within the armed services is that of the military chaplain. We've just celebrated 250 years of our heritage. And so in my remarks today, I'd like to kind of talk about three things. One, the legacy of the military chaplaincy. Secondly, the landscape of what it sort of looks like today, and then maybe with some lessons learned. In 1775, the new Continental Army Commander-in-Chief, George Washington, one of his first requests of Congress was that a religious leader, a chaplain, might be appointed to serve the needs of this new military. And if I can move forward to December the 17th, 1777, it was a distinctive point. On that particular day, a day of prayer and fasting took place before the Continental Army moved into Valley Forge, where they would spend a 6-month hard winter and a deployment. On that particular day, a young 30-year-old chaplain, Israel Evans, was asked to speak, and his message was from Psalm 115, verse 1. Not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name be the glory because of your love and faithfulness. And he went on to say, in a very lengthy sermon, which I will summarize, that it's not the size of the military, it's not the brilliance of the strategists who lead the military, it's not the fierceness of the warriors who fight our battles, but all of the glory, all the power, all the honor belongs to the Lord. When General Washington heard the sermon, he said, we need the blessing and the protection of heaven at all times for success, especially in times of public distress and danger. And he summarized some things that he wanted his chaplains to instill in the lives and the heart of the Continental Army soldiers. One, that they trust in a supreme being, the providence of God in their lives, and also that they would do their best to reflect through their moral character and conduct the nature of that supreme being of which they worshiped. And so for 250 years, our chaplains have always been there in respect to their faith beliefs and practices as they are sent out by their religious institutions of about 225 endorsing agency or religious bodies who send chaplains into the armed services. I would say one of their missions is always to be there and provide a ministry of presence in the lives of our troops to remind them, should they need to be reminded, especially in times of danger and pain, that a supreme being, that God is there with them. Our chaplains have endured the winters of Valley Forge. They've comforted the wounded in action. The first time that opposite forces, the Union and the Confederate chaplains, all prayed over and buried the respective individuals from that particular battle. We've braved trench warfare, stormed the beaches of Normandy, endured the cold winters of the Korean War, slugged through the Battle of Vietnam, traveled the most dangerous roads in Southwest Asia. Our chaplains were there. And as our chaplains have been with troops, they have felt convicted to ensure that they are with them, that they are honoring them, that they are caring for them, that they are nurturing the living, that they are tending to the wounded, they are honoring the fallen. One of our chaplains, Chaplain Charles Pierce, in the early 1900s, he saw something that was taking place that needed to be corrected. He noticed that during the Civil War that over 40% of those who were killed during the war were unidentified. And his desire was to ensure that we show the respect and dignity to those who have fallen in battle. And he came up with something called identification tags, name, rank, serial number, also in the faith of that particular individual, so that we might show the dignity to the fallen. There's another chaplain by the name of Oliver Nave. He wanted to ensure that our troops read the Bible, that they read the sacred scripture. And so he worked on a 14-year study classifying various topics in the Bible, 22,000 topics, by the way. And Chaplain Oliver Nave produced the Nave's Study Bible, which some of us are aware of. We had 13 chaplains jump into Normandy, 4 chaplains on the USS Dorchester as that was sinking. There's a beautiful picture of a rabbi, a Roman Catholic priest, a United Methodist chaplain, and a Dutch Reformed chaplain, all linking arms after they had cared for the troops, many of whom perished as the ship was going down. They also went down, but they stood in unity to their very death because they had given up their life preservers to those who did not have them. Chaplain Robert Taylor, you may never have heard of him, but he was a POW and was with his troops on a 65-mile Bataan Death March. Emil Kapan, Chaplain Emil Kapan, who was a POW in the Korean War. And he served their particular needs until his own demise in death, ensuring that they again experienced the presence of God through his ministry to them, even as he was dying. Chaplain Charlie Waters in the Battle of Dak To during Vietnam, again out front, serving the needs of our troops, ensuring that they were being brought close to the presence of God and receiving spiritual nourishment as God would give that to them. Some of you may have never heard of Dale Getz. Dale Getz was our first chaplain killed in action since Vietnam. He was killed in action in Kandahar in 2010 while supporting a sister battalion, ensuring that they had an opportunity to reflect on the things of God. And even today in Congress, we have two former chaplains, Navy chaplains, Barry Black and Margaret Kibben, who often, as they serve the 119th United States Congress, ensure that even our congressional leaders have an opportunity to reflect on the things of the Lord. So my point is our chaplains have always been there. And by the way, chaplains are non-combatants. They don't carry a weapon, but they are there with our troops, performing religious services within their own faith beliefs and practices and ensuring that those who are not within their own faith and belief background have the opportunity also to be respected for their particular religious beliefs. A chaplain is a religious leader and an advisor to the chain of command. A chaplain is a prophetic voice, one who hopefully will speak truth to power. The landscape. I entered the Army in 1973. At that time, chaplains taught character guidance classes. They'd been doing it since 1953 because of some of the challenges of our veterans in World War II and the Korean War. Chaplains had the opportunity to have a duty day with God, one day a month, where chaplains would take troops on fly fishing, hiking, some adventuresome training, and it would include an opportunity to have some spiritual reflection. Our military chapels on the weekends were decorated with flags from units that actually sponsored a military chapel for that particular weekend service. In 1977, I signed for Field Artillery Battery, a company of 110 soldiers, and part of my requirement was to look in their eyes to ensure they had their ID card, their dog tags, that they were actually present for duty. And after that took place, I had to sign a government document, not for 110 soldiers, but as I recall it, and that was some time ago, I signed for 110 souls. I was responsible as a young 26-year-old officer for the souls of all those within my chain of command. And that's why I needed a chaplain. I was raised in a Christian home. I accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior and Lord when I was 11 years old, but I needed some help working with those who were not from my particular religious background, and I looked to my chaplain to advise me on how properly to ensure the free exercise of religion in my ranks. As I look at the challenges of the day in the landscape, we are losing ground, as many of you have already mentioned, in the area of religious liberty. And as a good Baptist, I'll kind of alliterate a couple of things. There is a defiance to Almighty God, or to the authority of God, or to authority in general. We can read that and see that every day in the news. There's a degradation to the supreme being having any input into our lives. I'm not sure how we can change that direction without serious repentance. 2 Chronicles 7:14, if my people which are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then God will hear from heaven and forgive their sin and cleanse their land. We need that kind of a repentance, especially as we face the 250th celebration of our nation in 2026. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a spiritual awakening that moves across our nation? Secondly, there is a dilution of religion's importance in the lives of people. You hear the common phrase now, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. We're almost afraid to use that word religion and religious. And what we now have is this loose spirituality that does not have necessarily a religious leader to lead you in that. There's no sacred scripture in which you can walk together in that particular faith group. In some cases, if you're only spiritual without a religious community to grow in your faith and to be accountable, that's where a lot of isolation and alienation comes. So I would say that a religious community is very therapeutic and helpful as we all learn to grow in the fear and the reverence of Almighty God. And finally, there is a depreciation or a denigration of the importance of chaplains, military chaplains, as religious leaders. According to Title 10, the U.S. Code, which appoints and pays for chaplains, we pay for religious leaders. That's what our government does. What I see a trend that we're almost losing that identity within the context of the armed services as a religious leader. Chaplains are called, and I just wrote a few of these down, spiritual readiness coaches, combat multipliers, morale officer, the spiritual technician, values facilitator, resident philosopher. I added that one. And there's nothing wrong with us taking on other opportunities and duties that chaplains obviously do. You'll not find someone a better counselor in the area of crisis than chaplains. They know something about crisis and traumatic moments. They know something about family life. They know something about marriage. They know something about working with parents. They know something about working with others and being reconciliation agents. And yet, bottom line, their primary role in the context of the United States Armed Services is that they are religious leaders, first and foremost. But the role of chaplain seems to have been diminished. You've asked what happened in the last 15 or 20 years. I noticed it when I first came in the Army in the early 80s that we would be told you can only pray a non-sectarian prayer, whatever that means. No one, to my knowledge, even today, tells a chaplain how to pray. They can pray within the context of their faith beliefs and practices. If a chaplain is told how not to pray or how to pray, you've just established religion and you've violated their religious liberty. And yet chaplains have also, maybe they can't share their theological beliefs or thoughts on the sanctity of human life or biblical sexuality or marriage or family. In some respects, chaplains have been removed from some of these discussions where they need to be front line and center, including in the area of religious accommodation, our religious apparel, our dietary requirements, our grooming standards, our COVID shots. But something happened that it gets too complicated when you get the chaplain engaged. And yet that's why you absolutely need to hear from this individual who has another set of eyes and experience about what most benefits and helps and can speak to the particular issue. Chaplains who are providing ministry of presence, and they are truth bearers, and they bring soul care. In 2 days...
General, can I have you kind of come to a conclusion,
Yes,
just
sir.
so we can stay on time?
Yes, sir. In 2 days, Fort Campbell will observe the 40th anniversary of the worst airplane crash in history, December the 12th, 1985. The plane crashed on takeoff at Gander, Newfoundland. There were no survivors, and I still remember our commanding general who basically, as he looked at a room full of chaplains and commanders, he said to the senior chaplain, "Chaplain, tell us what we need to do." And I close my remarks basically with this. There is still within the context of the armed services, those questions that are being asked that I believe chaplains have an answer to. Soul questions. Chaplain, what do I need to do to take away the guilt, the pain? What do I need to help me sleep, or to ease my conscience, or to forgive others, or to forgive myself? Chaplain, what will help me break addiction? What will help my marriage? What will help me love my family? What gives me hope? And I believe that's why we need to really emphasize within the context of this commission and this hearing to re-emphasize the critical role that chaplains play as religious leaders within the context of the armed services.
Thank you, General. Rabbi?
So I'm sort of grateful that I'm following Chaplain Carver because to some degree I'm going to echo much of what he said. I may find myself being critical of the chaplaincy, but hopefully in a positive way. So let me begin by, ladies and gentlemen of the commission, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to testify before you to assist in your mission to mend the very broken and dysfunctional spiritual environment in today's U.S. military. To be sure, President Trump and Congress have taken steps to support religious liberty in the military, such as policy changes under the first Trump administration that protected religious accommodation for beards for Jewish service members, and legislation by Congress in the 2012 and 2020 National Defense Authorization Act that required protection for religious liberty and mandated military training on religious freedom. Mandatory. But as you will see from my testimony today, more work is necessary. Even the existing protection that are at risk at being rolled back, with Jewish service members being forced to choose between serving their country or their religion. That dilemma runs counter to the very values on which this nation was founded. At every stage of a service member's career, beginning at the recruiting office and continuing through basic training, deployment, and beyond, we see mounting obstacles to Jewish religious accommodation and free exercise rights. Given the central place of the First Amendment in our constitutional framework, we believe that religious accommodation should not be treated as an exception to policy. It should be policy. My name is Rabbi Sanford Dressen. I served for over 26 years as an active duty Army chaplain, retiring in the rank of colonel. I have been the chaplain endorser for the Aleph Institute for nearly 20 years. The Aleph Institute was founded in 1981 to serve the needs of Jewish men and women who find themselves distant from the support of a Jewish community. In the 1990s, Aleph served as the U.S. military, first by providing religious supplies and materials, and then in 2007 becoming a Department of Defense recognized chaplain endorsing agency. We now endorse over 50 Jewish chaplains and contract rabbis. We also advise and advocate for Jewish service members to ensure their free exercise rights are respected. We estimate that 50 to 75% of the religious accommodation needs that come to our attention require our intervention. Yet, while our advocacy has been strong, Aleph's power is only advisory. All too often, Jewish needs are dismissed outright. The cases we see each year number in the hundreds, and that does not include those who never reach us because they are in basic training, deployed, or have simply given up. Let me walk you through what Jewish service members experience, starting with the earliest stage, recruitment. Recruiters are rarely familiar with religious accommodation, rarely familiar. Moreover, they are incentivized to meet recruiting quotas. It's a numbers game. Because of that, recruiters fail to advise recruits about receiving exceptions to policy, religious exceptions to policy. Many recruits who do request accommodations are told that will be taken care of in basic training, or you will request that when you arrive at your unit, when in fact it is not. Testimonies in the packet you will receive illustrate this chronic situation. We have packets for many of you here, which are have the anecdotal material, so to speak, of what I'm talking about. At basic training, these problems intensify. Trainees are intimidated easily by cadre, and their religious liberty rights are routinely disregarded. Many troops report that during basic training, the religious preference on the dog tags and personal records is automatically set to a generic none. So that's the kind of default, or non-denominational. And they are told to fix it at their first duty station. This is unacceptable. In addition, kosher MREs, meals ready to eat, the field rations, are not consistently available. The need for Jewish Sabbath and holiday worship is regularly not acknowledged. Non-Jewish chaplains rarely advocate for their Jewish personnel, and most training bases do not have a Jewish chaplain or contract rabbi assigned to them, so the burden is left to the individual recruit. Unfortunately, the struggles do not end after basic training. Jewish service members face regular impediments to their religious observance at all stages of their careers. They could be a private, they could be an officer, a field grade officer, or even higher. They need to fight for accommodation for every Sabbath and holiday, and fight to receive kosher MRIs at every field training exercise and deployment. That brings me to our first major area of concern, food, rations. Religiously observant and even many less observant Jews keep a kosher diet. The parameters of a kosher diet are complex and beyond the scope of these proceedings. The U.S. military does provide kosher MREs. However, there are many problems with the availability and distribution of these MREs. Pre-accession or pre-movement requests for kosher MREs are not taken seriously, and orders don't get processed. The process of acquisition of kosher MREs is complex and lends to breakdowns in communication. This ordering process must be simplified. Who is responsible to order these rations? No one's identified clearly in the regulations. Supply chains, the unit, or the chaplain? How does the information flow to the Jewish service member? How can the service member follow up to ensure their food will be available? A Jewish soldier who's currently deployed just wrote to us last week, most of my calories are stuff like chips, honey buns, and chocolates because they can't get MREs. Why is that okay? Why is that acceptable? Even when supplies exist, how do personnel get them? A command chaplain, senior command chaplain in the Middle East told us that he has a warehouse full of kosher MREs in his area of responsibility. But our Jewish service members arriving on station can't easily access them. In one case, an officer in the Space Force was interrogated by a wing chaplain when she requested kosher MREs. It was only when Aleph intervened that she was given the MREs. In addition, there's a lack of training as to what constitutes kosher. As you will see in your packets, many supply sergeants have substituted non-kosher alternatives, vegetarian, halal, or porkless food instead of kosher. I can only recall, and anecdotally, when I was the command chaplain for the 7th Medical Command in Germany, when we deployed at the beginning of the Iraq War, our medical teams went in there and they decided to drop kosher MREs, not kosher MREs, but MREs to the Kurds, and not knowing that Kurds do not eat pork. And lo and behold, what was in the MREs? Pork products. Well, our doctors, when this came out, were scared stiff because they thought the Kurds were going to wind up shooting them. So there is a lack of education here when it comes to things like that. Finally, the quality of kosher MREs is far below nutritional standards. Thanks to an amendment in the 2026 National Defense Authorization Act, which was shaped by Aleph in concert with Representative Abraham Hamadeh, the law now requires functional parity and equitable treatment for kosher MREs. We look forward to seeing that requirement implemented before July 2026 as required. And focusing on commissaries, a commissary is like a military supermarket. Few substantive kosher products are found in their facilities in comparison with the average American supermarket. I know down south here, I could walk into a Piggly Wiggly and get bagels and lox and cream cheese and find a lot of kosher food. That doesn't hold true in many of our commissaries. This is because commissaries in the United States are limited by local distributors. For commissaries outside the United States, the situation is exacerbated.
Rabbi, excuse me, can I have you kind of conclude and
Wind up?
recommend
Sure,
that you wind up? Yes.
I will wind it up. Basically, there is a lot of ignorance in terms of the role of chaplain. Many commanders will accept the chaplain if they see him as a combat multiplier. Yes, but otherwise, if he functions in traditional spiritual domains, he's like a fifth wheel. And so I have much more to share with you, but I would, given the pressures of time and so forth, and the patience and the bladders of our people here, I'm willing to relinquish my time, and if there are any questions, be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Rabbi. Any questions? Yes, Bishop Barron.
Yeah, thank you both very much for the presentations. And this has been eye-opening in many ways to me, this whole hearing today. One thing I'm intrigued by, I've been following this whole question of disaffiliation for a long time, young people, especially going away from the faith. But in recent years, we've seen a halting of that, even a little bit of an uptick of interest. I spoke at the Naval Academy a couple years ago and was met with this extraordinary enthusiasm from these young kids. My question is, do you sense a resistance to the religious dimension among the soldiers and sailors themselves? Or is it higher up in the chain of command? Like, where is the institutional opposition coming from? If you sense, things have shifted. My guess is among the young, soldiers and sailors themselves, it's not there. But I'd be curious to know.
I work with our chaplains at our basic training out installations. Let's take Fort Jackson, I think, which averages the highest number of new recruits, and also on the service academies. And both of them, I can say the same thing. They are hungry for truth, any truth. They are hungry for relationships. They are interested in spiritual things, and they are interested in religion and community. And you find that within the context of a religious community of which we can provide. And so I can tell you there seems to be an uptick, especially in that initial entry training. But something happens as they go forth from their basic training outfits to the new units. And I could argue that it might be, as the rabbi has mentioned, it could be training that does not take place within the context of units that they go to, any mandatory training. Discussions on RFRA, discussions on the worldview. There are so many things that could take place. And I do remember back in the 70s, at least, we used to have some of these philosophical discussions on race relations or on character guidance. But something's happened. It's like, no, it's all about war fighting. We don't have time to talk on some of these soft areas of which there is an interest, including in the area of religion.
Yeah, I would just like to add to Chaplain Carver that I was a race relations facilitator in the early 70s following the Vietnam War, where we did experience a lot of racial conflict there. And so chaplains were the facilitators doing this type of work. And I would like to also point out that I find the average troop is quite amenable to the chaplain. I think a lot of it is top down, the problems that we're experiencing top down. So if we have mandatory training in RFRA or free exercise issues, then I would demand that senior officers be required to attend, not simply be able to sign off on a sheet and say they were present, but I would like to see them there as a requirement.
So, fine. We'd love your recommendations to what you think we should put in the report for the president, because again, our charter is to report not to Congress, but directly to the president. So if you will do that, thank both of you for your long service, and thank you for your testimony. And I apologize for having to hurry you along a little bit, but we lose the room at a certain time, and I have a few more witnesses ahead. So, General, thank you. Rabbi, thank you. Appreciate it. Rabbi just said in a crazy way, maybe related to me. So that's a whole nother story. We got to go back there. It's very funny. Thank you, Rabbi. Our next two witnesses. We have Amy Vitale and Monsignor Frontiero. Thank you for joining us. And let me ask if you can both keep to about 5 minutes because we're running a little behind. I don't want to shorten your remarks, but if you can do that. We're going to put ladies first. Amy?
Mr.
Can we
Chairman.
shut the door in the back? Can someone in the back shut the door for us? Thank you. Please tell us who you are and why you're here.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the honor of this invitation and the chance to be in this incredible building. The love of history and attention to architectural detail is around every corner. It's delightful. My name is Amy Vitale, and I serve as Government Affairs Counsel with the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty. It's fitting that we're here today to talk about military chaplains because the Army chaplaincy turned 250 years old this July. Military chaplains have been meeting the religious needs of our service members since before the very founding of our nation. We've heard so much about this morning. Many of us do not understand the duties of a military chaplain because we will never encounter the challenges of deployment or the harsh realities of war. Chaplains are an often unseen but critical part of the support structure needed by the brave men and women and their families who take up that burden. They follow service members directly into harm's way, and they do so unarmed as non-combatants. Because the military chaplaincy is unique, I'd like to highlight 3 components of the Chaplain Corps and its supporting legal structures. First, The chaplaincy is necessary to fulfill the government's constitutional obligation of providing for the religious exercise of service members. Religious liberty is core to what makes America a great nation. In the context of military service, that First Amendment promise creates an additional duty to provide for religious exercise. That's because those who answer the call to defend our nation leave their faith communities and support structures to deploy to new and foreign places. They are asked to take on challenging, stressful, grueling duties far from home, and that's why the chaplaincy exists, to bring God to soldiers and soldiers to God on the front lines where no one else can. George Washington understood this, which is why in 1775, as the general of the Continental Army, Washington created the federal chaplaincy that is still in existence to this day. The chaplaincy ensures that the government is meeting this constitutional duty to provide for the religious needs of our men and women in uniform. It is not optional. It is an essential element of support for our military service members. Second, the role of a chaplain is inherently religious. The panel before us touched on this as well. Of course, the government isn't qualified to decide who can be a Jewish rabbi or a Catholic priest or a Muslim imam. So all chaplains are endorsed or certified by their own religious groups who are best fit to judge those religious qualifications. These chaplains then perform two roles. They are both commissioned officers in the United States military, and they are religious leaders. But at all times, they represent the ecclesiastical bodies that certify them to the military branches as fit to provide pastoral care. Military chaplains distinctively serve members of all faiths, not just their own. There are approximately 3,000 chaplains across the entire United States military, and they are responsible for supporting almost 1.32 million active duty personnel, counseling them, providing pastoral support, and leading congregational worship. 3,000 chaplains, 1.32 million active duty personnel. If there is a religious need that a chaplain cannot meet, they work to connect the service member with somebody who can. When chaplains perform their duties, they are doing so as pastors, priests, rabbis, imams of their own faith groups. This means that the chaplain's counsel is inherently religious, and it's protected by the First Amendment, which places a structural protection around chaplains' performance of their religious duties. Chaplains, along with all service members, are additionally protected by multiple federal statutes, including the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, or RFRA, and conscience protections that the National Defense Authorization Act that Congress has passed in the NDAA. Collectively, these laws ensure that chaplains are not forced to abandon the very religious beliefs that animate their service. These federal protections are not just window dressing. In the mid-1990s, after President Clinton had vetoed the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act, the Pentagon issued a gag order forbidding military chaplains from speaking about important moral issues in legislation. It was RFRA that protected the ability of a Catholic priest, Father Vincent Rigdon, and a Jewish rabbi, Rabbi David Kay, to speak to their congregations about protecting life. It was RFRA that stood in the gap between military orders and sermon censorship. Chaplains are religious ministers who exist to meet the religious needs of soldiers. Congress has repeatedly reaffirmed the chaplaincy's religious role, and it's imperative that the religious distinctives of the chaplaincy be maintained for the future. Third, chaplains are an essential part of advising the chain of command. We've heard a lot about this today as well. Chaplains advise commanding officers and JAGs to ensure they're meeting the legal obligations of providing for religious exercise. But they best fulfill this role when they are fully integrated into the decision-making process by the officers that they serve. Ensuring the proper integration and support of chaplains through all levels of command improves the quality of our military force. Chaplains are able to help provide advice that both protects the rights of service members and that ensures we're able to maintain the best and brightest recruits of the highest moral character. A chaplain can advise on the sincerity of a Jewish or Sikh member's desire to have a neat and conservative beard consistent with their religious beliefs. They can help provide modest accommodations for this. They can weigh in and should be weighing in on questions of COVID vaccinations. And of course, they can help ensure that the command is not running roughshod over these religious beliefs. With all of this in mind, I'd like to propose four recommendations that this commission can consider to maintain the chaplaincy's effectiveness. First, the executive and legislative branches can ensure the role of a chaplain that it remains fundamentally religious. Chaplains are pastoral, and they should not be diluted to something more general than that. 2, the President can support and Congress can maintain full application of RFRA to protect religion in the military. Proactive support for RFRA's consistent application from the highest levels, the Secretary's office, military brass, down, that will cultivate a culture that is protective of religious liberty first. If we prioritize it, it will change. Congress can work with the Secretary as well to better integrate chaplains as advisors in the chain of command and to implement training for commanding officers, JAGs, chaplains on constitutional and statutory protections for religious freedom. If they know about the protections, they can better enforce them. And last but not least, excuse me, Congress can ensure that an adequate number of chaplains and the necessary commission and contract staffing are maintained. Prioritizing something means funding it and backing it so that the resources that need to be there are there. Thank you for your time and your commitment to protecting religious liberty for all.
Thank you, Amy. Monsignor.
Thank you very much. My name is Monsignor Anthony Frontero, and I serve as the Vicar General and the Moderator Vicaria of the Archdiocese for the Military Services USA. So, Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of this commission, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this opportunity to be with you. And the Archdiocese for the Military Services of the United States is headquartered in Washington, D.C., and the Archdiocese provides pastoral and spiritual care to the nearly 1.8 million Catholic men and women and their families serving in the military installations in the United States and overseas, to Catholic release staff and patients at Veterans Health Administration facilities, and to staff and other federal services located abroad. And I'm pleased to speak with you today, particularly about the importance of Catholic sacraments and the military chaplaincy. As Vicar General of the Archdiocese, I offer my testimony as someone who intersects with the realities of constitutional law, pastoral practice, and military readiness on a daily basis. My testimony will be limited to a few brief but fundamental points. First, constitutional foundations and military realities. Religious liberty, as has been said here by every speaker, is not a luxury good. It's a constitutional right with direct implications for morale, cohesion, and ethical conduct within the ranks. The First Amendment protects the free exercise of religion, and the Supreme Court has repeatedly emphasized that this protection does not disappear upon entry into military service. Nevertheless, the military is a unique institution, hierarchical, mission-driven, and necessarily restrictive in many aspects of personal liberty. The challenge, therefore, is not whether service members enjoy free exercise rights, because they do, but how those rights are operationalized in the demanding environment of military life. The more control the military exercises over an individual, the greater the military's responsibility becomes to ensure the free exercise of religion of service members and their families, especially during deployments or assignments abroad. Catholic service members and their families, currently one of the largest religious groups in the armed forces, rely on chaplains, not simply for spiritual encouragement, but for sacramental access. This is an essential distinction. For the Catholic tradition, sacraments such as the Eucharist, confession, anointing of the sick are not symbolic gestures or optional rites. They are indispensable channels of grace instituted by Christ himself. So denying access to the sacraments denies full religious practice. The role of Catholic chaplains. The U.S. military chaplaincy exists precisely to bridge the gap between constitutional principle and operational need. Chaplains serve the religious needs of their own faith communities while facilitating the free exercise rights of all personnel in a pluralistic environment. We know this. Catholic chaplains bear an additional burden, though, because many sacraments require a priest. They are the sole providers of those rights in deployed or remote environments. No other personnel, religious or secular, can substitute for sacramental ministry of a Catholic priest, such as the celebration of the Holy Mass, the sacrament of penance, confession, the sacrament of anointing of the sick and the dying. This creates a critical dependency. When Catholic chaplains are in short supply or overly restricted in their movements, Catholics service members may effectively lose access to their faith. This is not an abstract concern. In forward operating bases, ships at sea, submarines, and expeditionary medical units, the absence of a priest can mean weeks or months without Mass or the ability to receive absolution before dangerous missions. The military has long recognized that such deprivation harms morale and undermines the spiritual resilience essential for those serving under extreme stress. Spiritually, souls are at risk without the sacraments. The stakes cannot be higher. In recent years, the constraints and pressures. In recent years, several pressure points have emerged. Personnel shortages, the number of Catholic priests entering the chaplaincy has declined dramatically, creating coverage gaps across all branches. This shortage strains the ability of chaplains to provide minimum levels of sacramental access. Operational restrictions, increased security protocols, transportation limitations, and bureaucratic hurdles sometimes impede chaplains from traveling to remote units or from conducting services in field conditions. While safety is paramount, the unintended result can be de facto suppression of sacramental practice. Conscious protections. Catholic chaplains must be allowed to minister according to their faith tradition. This includes adhering to Catholic teachings in counseling, sacramental practice, and liturgical conduct. Clear and forced conscience protections ensure chaplains are not coerced into actions that contradict their sacred and ecclesial commitments. Pluralism and misunderstanding. Genuine religious pluralism is a strength of our armed forces. We all agree with this. However, misunderstanding arises when Catholic sacramental needs are viewed as mere preferences rather than doctrinal obligations. The chaplaincy model must maintain room for faiths with non-interchangeable rights. Decreased budgeting for religious support, to Amy's point. The dire priest shortage and requirements for priests to serve in operational units also necessitates adequate staffing of installation, chapel communities with administrative staff and religious education professionals to support the daily activities of Catholics and priests in their ministry. It is impossible for a priest to fulfill the work of operational unit and equally demanding roles of pastoring the installation chapel community without proper support. We've recently had a challenge with this with the Army. They're canceling contracts all over the place. Now, as a result of intervention of Archbishop Broglio, we've seen some positive movement towards rectifying the situation, and that should be noted. Mission readiness and human dignity. The military has long recognized that providing reliable access to religious support is not a distraction from mission readiness. It's mission enhancing. Soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, guardians, and Coast Guardsmen carry enormous burdens. They face life and death decisions, separations from family, exposure to moral injury, and the psychological weight of operating in high-risk environments. For Catholics, the sacraments offer not only spiritual meaning, but profound emotional stability. Confession, for example, helps address guilt and moral injury. The Eucharist strengthens a sense of identity, community, and purpose. Anointing of the sick provides comfort and hope in medical crises. Pastoral counseling, grounded in Catholic moral teaching, helps guide difficult ethical decisions. A military that preserves the sacramental life of its Catholic members is one that respects their dignity, supports their resilience, and reinforces the moral fabric essential to honorable service. Finally, recommendations. To ensure the robust religious liberty for our service men and women and their families, I respectfully offer several recommendations. Strengthen recruitment and retention of chaplains, including Catholic chaplains, through improved outreach, career pathways, and collaboration with the Archdiocese of Military Services. Reduce unnecessary barriers to chaplain mobility in deployed or isolated settings, allowing priests to reach personnel who rely on them. Ensure rigorous enforcement of conscience protections, preventing chaplains from being pressured into activities that conflict with their religious obligations. Integrate religious liberty impact assessments into operational planning to identify situations where sacramental access may be impaired. And finally, educate commanders and staff on the non-substitutable role of Catholic sacraments to foster informed accommodation at every level and to encourage adequate support staff to equip the priest to succeed in ministering to service members and their families. Finally, the United States military has a proud tradition of defending religious freedom, often in the most difficult of circumstances. Upholding that tradition today requires a clear recognition that Catholic service members cannot fully practice their faith without access to the sacraments, and that Catholic chaplains are indispensable for providing them. Preserving this access honors the Constitution, supports the moral and psychological health of the force, and strengthens the readiness of our armed forces. Thank you very much for your attention.
And just questions, comments? Questions, comments? I just had a thought as I'm listening, and we've had a number of witnesses on this issue because it's important. If we're talking about religious liberty, what all of you are talking about, you can't deliver that opportunity to the soldiers if you're not there. It would be like taking a community in America and removing all the churches and all the synagogues for what we might say are a part of the population, particularly at war or even just away from their families, that are very stressed individuals. So in the area of some of the most stressed individuals we have in performing their duties without a strong chaplaincy, we have removed the church, we've removed the synagogue, we've removed all these opportunities from them. That only compounds that issue. And I think this is a really important part of the testimony today. So thank you very much for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to move to some Texas issues now of religious liberty, since we're here in Texas. And many of you know Pastor Robert Jeffress from First Baptist. I've been there a few times with you, and it's what an incredible church it is. And we're going to stay on the clock. So I'm going to give you the majority of this time here. Dr. Ben, it may be short on your time, but I want you to have your full testimony on what happened to your church.
Well, first of all, thank you, Governor Patrick, for this opportunity. Dr. Carson, thank you. It's good to see you again, and we thank this commission. With me today is Dr. Ben Lavorne, our executive pastor and attorney himself, who helped lead our legal team in the case that we're going to talk about today for just a moment. Now, I promise, Governor, 9 minutes and no more. I've got it timed out, but we want the bulk of the time to be for you to ask any questions. On June 8th, 2020, our church, the First Baptist Church of Dallas, hosted its annual Celebrate Freedom patriotic service to celebrate our nation's Christian heritage. Every year at this service, we honor the various branches of the military, and then we invite a guest speaker to talk about our nation's Christian heritage. In 2017, we held this service at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., and President Trump was our guest speaker. For this service in 2020, President Trump sent his Vice President, Mike Pence, and a cabinet member, Dr. Ben Carson, to represent him. Although neither Vice President Pence nor President Trump was the official nominee of their party yet, that would come later in the Republican convention, we carefully followed the guidelines the IRS had for treating potential candidates who speak in a church. Neither I nor anyone else during the service officially endorsed Vice President Pence, President Trump, or anyone else. Instead, the Vice President and Dr. Carson shared their faith journeys of how they came to faith in Jesus Christ. Shortly after the service, the Freedom from Religion Foundation filed a complaint with the Internal Revenue Service against our church for that patriotic service. It's interesting that we did not hear anything from the IRS for 11 months. and 4 months after Joe Biden became president. It was on May 6, 2021, that the IRS informed our church that they were initiating an inquiry into the tax-exempt status of our church because of our patriotic service. It's important to note that our church has never had an issue with the Internal Revenue Service. I have a history of encouraging pastors to follow IRS regulations and not endorse candidates from the pulpit. In fact, on Sunday, November 1st, 3 days before the 2020 election, I appeared on Fox and Friends and explained why our church does not endorse candidates, but instead urge our members to vote their biblical convictions. Later that morning of November 1st, during our worship service in our church, I reiterated to our congregation that we do not endorse candidates. We encourage Christians to vote their biblical conviction. On that very same Sunday, November 1st, while I was speaking in our church, Joe Biden was speaking at another Baptist church in our country, the Sharon Baptist Church in Philadelphia, where he and the church's pastor openly encouraged members to vote for Biden while both men were standing in front of a campaign banner in the church. When we pointed out the contrast to the IRS between our non-endorsement policy and this church's flagrant disregard for the Johnson Amendment, the IRS officials conducting the examination had no response. As a result of the church tax inquiry, we enlisted several attorneys to help us. One of those attorneys in Washington, D.C., was the former head of the tax-exempt division of the Internal Revenue Service. He said this investigation was unprecedented. He had never seen anything like it before, and he said it's the first time he believes the IRS ever threatened a church for anything that happened in the worship service of that church. After we carefully provided all the information the IRS requested, we were notified that the IRS was not satisfied with that information and announced that they were going to pursue a complete church examination that would last more than a year and end up costing our church hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. After months of discussion and attempts to try to resolve the matter with the IRS apparently recognized the constitutional issues inherent in threatening a church's tax-exempt status based on concerns about the worship service. So the IRS abruptly expanded its focus to statements I had made in support of President Trump on Fox News, where I serve as a contributor. Now, our church has always posted my television interviews on our website on a variety of topics, with a clear disclaimer that these interviews are posted for information purposes only for our members, and that my views do not represent the views of the First Baptist Church of Dallas. And we reiterated on the website that our church does not endorse candidates. Our church's YouTube page contains hundreds of interviews I've done on a variety of topics, including my November 1st appearance on Fox and Friends when I said our church does not endorse candidates. Ironically, while the IRS actively pursued our church for statements I had made supporting President Trump, the IRS area manager overseeing the church tax examination had regularly posted comments and images on her social media pages supporting Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Throughout the IRS examination, our church announced our resolve to pursue this matter to its just conclusion, including going to the United States Supreme Court if necessary. We believe that our church's steadfast resolve not to waver on this issue and vigorously defend the rights of all churches is what led the IRS to suddenly close the examination. In a letter dated July 8, 2022, the IRS acknowledged that the First Baptist Church of Dallas did not engage in any improper political intervention or violate the U.S. tax code. So then why am I here before you this morning, before this Religious Liberty Commission? Although our church could afford to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars defending ourselves, most churches could not do that. And no church should have to do that. The government has absolutely no business determining what is proper and improper speech in the worship service of any church. The IRS and any government agency lack the ability to distinguish between political speech and biblical conviction. And that's illustrated in the case of my friend and fellow Texan, Bunny Pounds, the founder of the organization Christians Engaged, which educates and motivates Christians to vote. In May of 2021, the very same month the IRS announced they were coming after us, the IRS also denied Bunny's organization, Christians Engaged, their application to become a tax-exempt nonprofit organization because of their desire to educate voters on what the Bible says about the sanctity of life, the definition of marriage, and U.S.-Israel relations. In their letter of denial, the IRS identified these beliefs as, quote, Bible teachings typically affiliated with the Republican Party and candidates, end of quote. Although the IRS reversed their decision against Christians Engaged after a public outcry, this initial decision by the IRS to equate biblical beliefs with forbidden political speech illustrates how easily the Johnson Amendment could be misused to silence churches directly or cause them to engage in self-censorship to avoid costly litigation. I want to make it clear. I am not arguing against any government regulation about how a church spends tax-exempt money or doesn't spend on political campaigns. But what I am saying is the government has absolutely no right to regulate what is said in a church. What I preach from the pulpit of the First Baptist Church of Dallas, or any pastor preaches from his church, is none of the government's business. Governor Patrick and Vice Chairman Dr. Carson, I want to thank you. I want to thank our great president, Donald Trump, for appointing you to this commission to safeguard our most cherished freedom. Freedom that has been called our first freedom, and that is the free exercise of faith. God bless each one of you.
Thank you, Pastor. You know, we had a case in Houston, where I live, from a former mayor, and there was a sermon that this mayor didn't like, and you know the story, and she actually said they should send the sermons to her office. And my pastor responded, I'll send them if she'll read them. They didn't send them. Dr. Levon, if you want to add to this, and we'll open for some questions on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. Just to provide some additional context for our discussion today, the issue at hand really is what is known as the Johnson Amendment. The Johnson Amendment was adopted in 1954 as an amendment to the Internal Revenue Code, specifically Section 501c3. Now, as you know, for almost the first 2 centuries of our nation's history, it was churches that served as the primary source to which our citizens would turn to learn about politics and the most important issues of the day. It was churches and it was pastors that served as the driving forces for positive societal change. But in 1954, then Senator Lyndon B. Johnson from Texas was unhappy because 2 secular nonprofit organizations were opposing his candidacy. And so he proposed this amendment in 3 sentences, and it was adopted without hearing or debate. And since that time, it has been used to silence and threaten and chill free speech and the free exercise of religion. It was never intended to apply to churches, and yet churches were swept up in this issue simply because we're classified as 501c3 organizations. The Johnson Amendment is unconstitutional on its face, and it's unconstitutional as applied. And yet it has rarely been challenged because it has rarely been enforced. When it has been enforced, or when the IRS has threatened to enforce it, it has always been inequitably enforced, unfairly enforced, and applied only to those churches that support conservative values and conservative leaning candidates. It is currently being challenged in federal court in a lawsuit that was filed by the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. They have actually entered a consent decree in which the IRS acknowledges that the Johnson Amendment should not be enforced against churches. The IRS in that consent decree notes that this is based on our nation's history and the normal practice that churches should be permitted to instruct their congregants in political matters, and that an enforcement of the Johnson Amendment against those churches would in fact be a violation of their constitutional rights. That consent decree, though agreed upon by the IRS, is still being challenged by third party in that federal court, and that order is currently under consideration. Now, even though the Johnson Amendment has rarely been enforced against churches, though they attempted to enforce it against the First Baptist Church of Dallas for something that happened in a worship service, it's not so much the enforcement of the Johnson Amendment that has infringed upon our freedom of speech. It is the threat of enforcement. For too long, the Johnson Amendment has served as the sword of Damocles that is hanging over the head of Bible-minded pastors. And it's that threat that chills free speech and chills the free exercise of religion. As our pastor has said, no pastor and no church should have to spend every Sunday concerned about whether what they say may rise the ire of the Internal Revenue Service. And in fact, Justice Clarence Thomas recognized this in a concurring opinion in a recent religious liberties case. He actually cited back to a 1987 opinion by the Supreme Court. He said, "It is a significant burden on a religious organization to require it, on pain of substantial liability, to predict which of its activities a secular court will consider religious. The line is hardly a bright one, and an organization might understandably be concerned that a judge would not understand its religious tenets and sense of mission. Fear of potential liability might affect the way an organization carried out what it understood to be its religious mission."
Thank you, Doctor. And I want to open up for some questions from the Kelly Shackelford. You're up first.
Yeah, I just want to bring out one point that I think some people know, and I want to make sure we all know. We had 3 cases over the last year, big churches and small churches, where they got this kind of inquiry letter, a threatening letter. They're going to look through all your records and all this. Every time we sent a letter to the IRS saying you have zero authority in the pulpit of a church in the United States of America, we cite a lot of cases and we say, get lost. Every time they drop their case, because they do not want this in front of a federal judge so that the constitutional issues can be decided, because then their fear approach, would be lost. And so the question is how to, and this is, I think, the real question for us, is how to do something that will be permanent, that will stop this. Obviously, you've got the lawsuit that's in front of Judge Barker that you mentioned with the NRB. Of course, will that just apply to those parties before it, right? So we've really got to be creative in our thinking and do something to take care of this, because it's just blatantly unconstitutional, but we can never get in court. And that's the problem with the churches. So we can't get a precedent that then will protect all the churches and religious organizations. So anyway, I don't know if y'all thought about that, but that's the problem. That's
We
what I'm bringing
have.
up.
And by the way, I have to note, Governor Patrick, that Kelly, 30 years ago, defended my daughter, who's on the front row, when she was 8 years old, her right to share water bottles that had a Bible verse on them in school. So we're always grateful to you, Kelly, for that. You know, this is going to have a legislative fix of some kind to it, whether it's complete abolition or rewriting or carve-outs. But here's the challenge that you all are going to face as a commission. Polls overwhelmingly show that pastors do not want to endorse candidates and congregations don't want their pastors endorsing candidates. That's very clear, but that's not the issue here. The issue is not whether they should, but whether they can. And if you ask in the same poll people, do you believe the government ought to be able to regulate what is said in any church? The overwhelming number of people will say no. So it's how you frame it that's going to be important. But we do think legislative fix is important. You know, I talk to President Trump like you do, and he says, you know, we've got this thing taken care of as long as I'm in office. But there'll come a day when there'll be another person in office and it can be weaponized again.
And in that regard, we have 3 specific recommendations, if you will. First, of course, we would support a repeal of the Johnson Amendment, but if not a repeal, an amendment of the Johnson Amendment. This is not unprecedented. For example, an application of the substantial amount test, which is applied in lobbying cases, would be appropriate. Consideration of funds that are directly attributable to political speech being non-deductible to those donors would even be more appropriate than a complete blanket prohibition against political speech that costs you not a portion of your funds, but your entire tax-exempt status if you violate it in any sense. Or at least a narrowly tailored and specific application of the Johnson Amendment so that it is not so broad and vague that the IRS itself serves as judge, jury, and executioner in how to interpret and apply it. Secondly, challenge it in the courts. We mentioned that pending consent decree, but churches are harmed today because they're not able to exercise their free speech. And finally, to advance legislation like the Fair Speech Fairness Act, which is currently pending before the House and the Senate for their consideration.
I'm going to go down to Dr. Phil, and I'll come back to you, Bishop Barron. Dr. Phil.
You know, part of this is, you know, we've talked about that the secular is not neutral. And the strategy here is management by intimidation. The whole approach is you may beat the rap, but you're not going to beat the ride. In the end, they drop it before it goes to court, so their weakness is not shown. But they're going to make it so painful that a church that's not as blessed as the First Baptist Church of Dallas is going to say, we can't do this. Yeah. So they're intimidated and step back from it. And that's why your recommendations about the amendment are so critical. There can be some kind of element where if it gets to that point where they drop it, they've got to 10x your fees back, attorney fees back in some way, where they start having a little trouble making their numbers. There's got to be some way where they have a hard time making the ride also. But it's just management by intimidation. They just think, you're not going to get a conviction here. You're not going to get their status pulled, but we can sure make it painful. They know it when they start. They know they're not getting there, right, Kelly? They know they can't sustain this.
Well, we felt strongly that they viewed the First Baptist Church of Dallas as an example case. And we knew that if they prevailed against us, churches across the nation would be intimidated and scared to speak out. And so we felt that the Lord had called us to stand in the gap to defend those churches against that type of intimidation.
Bishop Barron.
Yeah, thanks very much for the presentations. And, the Catholic policy is very much in line with what the pastor mentioned, that we don't advocate candidates from the pulpit. I mean, so that's very clear. But I do worry a lot of us do, about the kind of creeping influence of the Johnson Amendment. And I go back, if we're going to add to the philosophical section of our recommendations, it was Tocqueville who famously said, a democracy cannot function without a moral religious foundation. And it comes, he said, from fiery pulpits, that he witnessed when he came to America. And to Reverend Graham's point, about our pulpits being silenced. So that's our problem, but also we can't let the government silence our pulpits, because that's how the people are formed. And then to the general point too, about the non-neutrality of secularism. There's a moral ideology attached to that, and it's being very aggressively foisted upon our people. And if we're silenced in our own pulpits and we can't articulate a moral vision, we're in some serious trouble. So I think it'd be good to talk about Tocqueville, maybe a bit in the philosophical section, but to see this as a real case in point.
Thank you, Bishop. Dr. Carson?
Thank you all very much for your courage in doing this. I'm reminded of the congressional record, January 10, 1963, the 45 goals of communism in America. I think we may have found out who they are. That 27th one is infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion. And that seems to be what's going on. Pastors putting their finger in the air and seeing which way the wind is blowing and trying to tailor their sermons to that rather than preaching the gospel of God. How can we get more pastors? Pastor Jeffers, you're a very courageous man. How can we get more of them to have courage? God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind.
I wish it's something we could legislate, but we can't. And you know that as well. I just think it has to begin inside, that people realize if they've been called to preach, they've been called to God, and they've been called to preach not what's popular, but what is true. And that has to be the beginning point for everyone.
Ryan?
So I wanted to float an idea, see what Kelly and Allison think about this, but put it on the table for something we could deliberate about in our formal recommendations, because it strikes me that we're never going to get 60 votes in the Senate to get rid of the Johnson Amendment or to modify or to amend the amendment, right? So as long as the legislative filibuster is in existence, nothing is changing. But what about going through the formal rulemaking process when we have a favorable administration like right now, and the Trump IRS was to explicitly go through the notice and comment period, put out a regulation saying the Johnson Amendment does not apply to churches or synagogues or any house of worship, precisely because of First Amendment protections, right? They cite that as the reason that they're making this formal rule. Then when you get a hostile presidential administration, they would have to go through the formal rulemaking process to rescind that rule. If they get it through, it strikes me you can then sue them that they've just issued a regulation that violates the First Amendment. And that could be how we could actually get a fix to this, not just for this 4-year administration, but for future administrations as well, without having to go through the legislative process. So anyway, I just wanted something we should mull over, because I'm not a lawyer, but I know something about the administrative state, and it's worth kicking the tires on.
Any other questions? So I'm going to hesitate to ask this question, but it is a committee, and we're here to ask questions. Have all of the times that the IRS has come in, I think you said it's been towards churches that seem to support conservative issues and Republicans. Is that the history?
Well, of course, we don't know every investigation they've undertaken. What we do know is those churches who have pushed back against the Johnson Amendment have always been those conservative-minded churches. We also know that Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton all made campaign stops at churches on a regular basis, and there's certainly no record of those churches ever being investigated.
So here's where I want to be careful. So if a Republican in the White House were to instruct the IRS or the IRS on their own would go and do the same thing to one of those churches where President Biden or whomever it was speaking, and put them through the ringer like they put you through the ringer. Do you think that would bring a little bit more of attention to maybe where you get 60 votes because they're being threatened? And we don't want to see any church threat. You should, every pastor, everyone should be able to say what they want in the church, as people give you a standing ovation. But one side is getting away with it, and the other side's being punished. It seems to me that it'd be interesting to see how the other side would react if suddenly, when a Democrat presidential nominee showed up, if they heard from the IRS like you did, and you didn't even do anything wrong.
I think it would certainly make news, but I agree with what you said. We don't want to see that happen. We don't want the IRS coming into any church. But this is not being uniformly enforced. I mean, let's all be honest here. Ethnic churches, minority churches have candidates all the time, and nobody says a word about it because they don't want to be called racist. But the fact is, I mean, can you imagine what if the IRS had gone after Martin Luther King Jr. for mixing politics with civil rights? Well, he should mix them. He was preaching out of his heart what he believed was the truth. We don't want to see them coming into anybody's church, and I would just stay with that.
Yeah, well, I totally agree, and that's why I was a little hesitant in asking the question. But I did want to point out it's not an even playing field.
No, it's not.
And so it's being enforced in an uneven playing field, and only one side is being pursued, and things might change otherwise. So again, thank you. I had to ask the question. Any other questions? Thank you. Always great to see you. And the fiery pulpits that Tocqueville talked about. Thank you for bringing one here today. We appreciate it. All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, this is our last panel of the day. As we bring our two last witnesses forward. And we have Dr. Andrew Fox, and we have Phyllis Morris. So thank you for joining us today. And I like to do ladies first. So if it's okay with you, do you want to go first? Or you? Okay. They want you to conclude. So you'll be the final voice of this day of great witnesses. Dr. Fox.
Thank you. Well, thank you to this commission and President Trump for the honor of speaking with you today. I'm profoundly grateful for this administration's commitment to protecting religious freedom, not as a partisan priority, but as a foundational duty for anyone entrusted with a measure of power. It is my conviction that government should be freedom's best friend and not its worst enemy. Now, you can probably tell by my accent that I was not born in Texas. I was not born here, but I was adopted and raised in England. It makes July the 4th a very interesting day for me concerning tea taxes, monarchy, and just about everything else. Now, 26 years ago, my wife and I packed up our young family and we came to the United States. I arrived on a religious workers visa, eager to live in a nation where religious freedom is written into the Bill of Rights, into its very first few lines. In other words, right into the heart of the Constitution. I've come to know, and I'm proud to say, that the United States has the most enduring Constitution in the world. It's what makes America great, and it's the best refuge for people who want to live and work here consistent with their deepest beliefs. Now, this promise drew us here with a strong sense of God's calling. And that's why, along with my family, we are now proud citizens of the United States of America, and they are watching live on this feed this moment. I've always had a fire in my bones, so to say, from the book of Jeremiah for serving others, especially the least of my brethren, as Jesus would say. I've learned that from my own father and his peers. Now, as a teenager in England, I volunteered at my local church and learned many more things. I was in trouble for chasing girls and a number of other things that included stealing from the offering. As a teenager, I got reprimanded, disciplined, but that was all for my good. I married my wife eventually, and I've been married to her for 33 years. I began planting churches in the south of England and settled in the county of Devon. That's right near Cornwall, pastoring a church. In 1999, that fire in my bones carried my family and myself across the Atlantic Ocean. I pastored a church in Washington State for 10 years, where I became very good friends with the chief of police in the city of Kennewick. He asked if I'd consider serving as the department's volunteer chaplain. I responded positively, and that not only reshaped me, but it changed the trajectory of my life. I walked with officers through scenes of gang violence, suicide, shooting, death in all of its gruesome ways, and especially fires. I saw moments where the fragility of human life was laid bare behind the iron steel of first responders. My calling was to be the hands and feet of Christ to everyone I met within the department and outside in that priestly role. And then in 2013, my family and I moved to the great state of Texas. And in many ways, I wish I'd have moved straight here and avoided the other 2 states that I lived in. But that's a story for another day. I've mentioned one state, I won't mention the other, but I'm looking for a lobotomist to remove it from my head. I met the then chief of the Austin Fire Department, and she told me that they'd been without a chaplaincy program for 15 years. Now, she had no observable or discernible faith, but she valued what chaplaincy could bring to the uniformed personnel under her command. I had the privilege of building Austin's first chaplaincy program at the fire department from the ground up that served 1,400 uniformed and civilian members and their families for about 8 years. You know, and I know, that firefighters run towards danger. But when the smoke clears, what you're left with is human beings who carry the weight of trauma and loss that they've seen in others. They need prayer. We've heard that from chaplains today. Counsel, support, and sometimes someone just to have a drink with them and listen, and they will talk about anything except the very thing that they need to talk about. The value of this is priceless, and it takes a lot of effort to become part of that. Usually with a firefighter trying to wrestle with trauma and loss, there are extramarital affairs, violence and substance abuse, and all of that has to go to the grave with you. You cannot disclose that to anyone else. That was my privilege, to walk alongside some of the most courageous men and women I've ever met. And I miss them. I do. I miss them. I remember Austin's devastating ice storm years ago. 2 battalion chiefs got on the phone and called me from Georgetown, where I live. When I arrived, I found that there was a family just trying to stay warm, a poor family that had perished. As firefighters were pulling the bodies out of the house, it was my job to cover them on the sidewalk and stand with them with your back to the media so no one can misinterpret your face, and prayerfully stand there. And there is mystery in that, the presence of the unseen Christ with us. The firefighters are able to carry out their duties when those human capacities are dealt with. I went back to the fire station with many of the firefighters, and during that night, someone would want prayer. They'd want to talk, or they'd simply want help before the end of the shift, before they go home to their wife, their husband, and to their children. I was able to serve those first responders because I'd spent time building trust with them. And those in the military and paramilitary groups know the more polite people are to you, the less you are accepted. The more insults and sarcasm that is thrown at you, the more welcome you are. You can imagine again July the 4th being a wonderful day for me amongst firefighters. I was able to serve these good men and women, and I served every firefighter, every family, every person in need. I knew those that identified as LBGT, Q, and all the other letters as well, but the same compassion that I had for everyone was shared with everyone. When someone is grieving, when someone is afraid, you never ever ask, how do you identify? You simply ask, how can I help you? You serve those who serve themselves selflessly. But exactly 4 years ago yesterday, the ministry that I loved and founded from the ground up and considered my contribution to the country that accepted me came to an abrupt end when the city of Austin fired me. This is why I missed my brothers and sisters in uniform and the civilian personnel. They fired me simply because of my Christian faith. You see, on my own time, I shared on my own personal blog the history of women's athletics and the importance of protecting women's sports. In short, I argued that a biological man transitioning to become a woman, competing against women, was yet another onslaught against the beauty of what God created in a woman. I expressed myself and my beliefs rooted in Scripture that God created men and women in His image, equal, distinct, and beautiful. But Austin officials disagreed with me. They found my words in a private blog that had nothing to do with the fire department an offense. And so they demanded that I write a letter of apology open for the city to read. I could not believe this was the America that it had become. It wasn't the America that I'd moved to. I told them that my intent was to foster respectful dialogue, not hurt anyone, and if someone felt offended, I was truly sorry. I could not renounce God's truth precisely because the gospel is for everyone, every person made in the image and likeness of God with inherent dignity and worth, and needs to know about Christ, mostly by actions and sometimes with words. I am clear what Scripture teaches me, to love God and love my neighbor as myself. And as Jesus said, upon these two things depend all the law and the prophets, the whole canon of Scripture. Now, I got terminated anyway, regardless. Now, I'm a big fan of C.S. Lewis. I've been to his house, sat at his desk where he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, been to his college, his grave, and so much more. I've got everything he ever wrote and some very rare recordings on tape. One thing that he shared highlights my own convictions. Courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at its testing point. My testing point came when it became very clear that to keep the ministry that I felt God was leading me into, the very reason I moved to the United States, not to get a job, I had one, but to serve the country that accepted me. The only way I could keep that was to renounce my faith and apologize for biblical convictions about gender. I couldn't do that, I won't do that, and I will never do that. For 8 years, I'd served in the fire department with compassion and equal treatment, with no exceptions. I knew I had to be faithful to God and not to Caesar. So with the help of the Alliance Defending Freedom, I sued the city of Austin for violating the First Amendment. It was not an easy decision, but one I stick to. I knew I had no choice. You see, my children are watching this broadcast. I want them to know, and my 3 beautiful grandchildren to know, what it is to inherit an America that has moved off base and needs to come back to the central base. To be American is to be courageous, curious, civil, and most of all, free in what you have to say. However, if government can punish clergy for posting something on a personal blog about Scripture and the importance of preserving women's sports, then all American rights are in jeopardy. After all, religious liberty ensures that no political regime can ever have ownership of the human soul. Only God has that. Today, my prayer is that my story will infuse courage to us all, that we remain a nation where people can disagree passionately and live peaceably, where pastors, clergy, where they can preach, citizens can speak, and the government remains in its rightful place as freedom's greatest protector. Again, I did not move to the United States for a job. I had one in England. I moved here out of a sense of calling. And it seems to me over these 26 years, the Christian voice has been pushed back into the wilderness. However, it is from the wilderness that there is a strong voice. Prepare ye the way of the Lord. God bless you at this Christmas time abundantly. Thank you.
To all your grandkids out there, be proud of Pop-Up. What do they call you?
Many things I can't mention publicly, but it's usually Grandpa Saurus, just like any other grandpa, but better.
Well, you've made them proud.
Thank you.
Phyllis, you will be our last witness today, and the microphone is yours.
Okay. Thank you for the honor of just a normal citizen being able to come and tell a little Christmas story. Nativity scenes have always been very meaningful to me. I was reared in Dallas, which always had great Christmas displays. The most memorable one was a live presentation with the Holy Family, along with shepherds, wise men, the lamb, sheep, oxen, and even camels, which I'd only seen before in a zoo. And so my mother loved Christmas, and she also initiated a manger scene for many years in her neighborhood, perhaps due to my father's advice. Also, my love for the Nativity presentation was inspired by a visit to the Holy Land in 1971. In the town of Bethlehem, there were workers who worked on carving various objects from olive wood. One of the most popular items was the Nativity set that was produced assembly line style, with the most proficient carvers advancing to the face carving. My husband and I purchased a large set that was central in our home for many years, and we also later purchased several versions for our daughters. And over the years, in Sweetwater has provided many types of Christmas activities, including Santa Clauses, decorations, various booths, and parades. A number of years ago, the parade theme pertained to the Christmas story. My church had a float commemorating the birth of Christ, which was a standard depiction of Mary and Joseph, baby Jesus, etc. But none of the other entries had any religious significance at all. The focal point was Christ's birthday, so why was not the emphasis there? I began to wish our town would include a nativity scene along with other secular Christmas displays. A few years later, I became part of the Sweetwater Women's Forum. During a general meeting, the Civic Improvement and Beautification Committee asked for suggestions for funding, so we decided to start Christmas projects. I made a motion to purchase an outdoor nativity set. The vote to do that was unanimously approved, but the committee's approval was just the first step. Next, I had to contact the county judge to see if we could place it at the courthouse. I knew the judge might be apprehensive and might oppose the proposal, so I wanted to be thoroughly prepared, knowing our First Amendment rights. So I researched some documents, and I learned that in 2020, in the case of Woodring versus Jackson County, Indiana, the Seventh Circuit of Appeals held that a nativity scene on government property did not violate the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. The court reasoned that the display fit with a long national tradition of using the nativity scene in a broader holiday displays to celebrate the origin of Christmas, a public holiday. In this holding, the court departed from the long-standing doctrine that evaluated holiday display cases using the Lemon Test, which required any holiday display to have a secular purpose. In compliance with the First Amendment, Jackson County was able to continue the display of a creche model representing the scene of Christ's birth in a public place. My conclusion was that the Sweetwater Nativity was not only permissible, but it was and is protected. After doing this research, I met with the judge in our meeting, and I shared what I had learned about the First Amendment's protections. After hearing about the current cases, the county judge was somewhat satisfied, but said that I also would have to get permission from the county commissioners. At that point, I became apprehensive myself Because I know how things go, I requested that the forum receive written approval prior to continuing the project, and we did receive that. Yet almost immediately after the scene was set up, a letter to the editor of the local newspaper, the Sweetwater Reporter, was published decrying the exhibit and requesting that the religious display be removed from the Nolan County Courthouse. The letter claimed that religious expression like the Nativity violated the separation of church and state, allegedly required by the Constitution. However, because of my research, I knew better, so I quickly drafted and hand-delivered a response to the editor. I hope the letter would answer questions raised by the malcontent and others. But after the public meeting was announced, many groups and churches in the area developed an interest in the situation after county commissioners decided to call a public open meeting. So there was a large public outcry. When the day of the public meeting came, the room was overflowing out of the hearing room into the halls and clear to the entrance. Representatives from Abilene, Texas, news and television stations from neighboring counties came to report and televise information about the situation. Many people spoke during the public meeting, and the vast majority were in favor of keeping the display. In the end, the commissioners did not remove the Women's Forum nativity set. They simply clarified that if other citizens wanted to display religious representations of secular ones, they could do so with the same permission. But the story was not over yet. As an aftermath, what a surprise. On Christmas Eve, the Sweetwater Reporter had a large front-page headline and article reading, "Citizens of Sweetwater Recognized with Religious Freedom Award." We were honored to receive Beckett's Tiny Tim Toast for inspiring hope and perseverance in the face of adversity during the Christmas and Hanukkah season. And I'm grateful to say that the Women's Forum Nativity is now a permanent part of our annual Christmas display and is out the courtyard, outside of our courthouse, even as we speak. In addition to commemorating the Christmas season, the Women's Forum desires that will continue to be a staple in our hometown celebration to give joy to many lives in this major victory for religious freedom. While we talked a lot today about law and policy, I would like to close by remembering the person I believe is the reason for it all with this poem by Dr. James Allen Francis. It begins, "He was born in an obscure village, the child of a peasant woman. He grew up in another obscure village where he worked in a carpenter shop until he was 30. For 3 years, he was an itinerant preacher. He never had a family or owned a home. He never set foot inside a big city. He never traveled 200 miles from the place he was born. He never wrote a book or held an office. He did none of these things that usually accompany greatness, but while still a young man, the tide of popular opinion turned against him. His friends deserted him. He was turned over to his enemies and went through the mockery of a trial. He was nailed to a cross between 2 thieves. While he was dying, his executioners gambled for the only piece of property he had, his coat. After he died, he was taken down and laid in a borrowed grave. 20 centuries have come and gone, and today he is the central figure for much of the human race. All the armies that have ever marched, all the navies that have ever sailed, and the parliaments that ever sat, and the kings that ever reigned, put together, have not affected the life of man on earth as powerfully as this one solitary life." Thank you. Is there any questions?
Questions, comments?
I'll do so.
Carrie?
Well, I need a tissue now. You are such a beautiful example to us. You're just a normal woman. I don't know you well, but I can tell you're a good woman. And I want to thank you because you did exactly what we should all be doing. We need to go on offense as Christians. And we need to thank God for the Lemon test. First Liberty fought and won that case that said Lemon is dead. It's bad law. So now nativity scenes need to be going up. Now they need to be going up everywhere. And we as Christians have to really rise to the occasion and stop playing nice. We're so nice. And it's a good quality, and I'm grateful for that quality. But you are just such a beautiful example to all of us. And I love that we ended with this story because it's a success story of just an everyday average woman who decided to stand. And look at what has happened because of you. So you have really encouraged me to go back to my crazy town in California. I didn't think things like this happened in Texas, but they happen everywhere. So I'm so sorry what happened to you. That should never happen to anyone. And thank you, as someone who has a daughter in girls sports. Thank you for standing up for women and for my daughter. Thank you so much.
Kelly?
Yeah, I think it's great that you found the Jackson County case. So you had a case in your favor. And I think that was before we won the Coach Kennedy case and overturned the Lemon test. So it was even legally allowed then, but now it should be obvious because of what happened at the Supreme Court in the Coach Kennedy case. And so the problem is people don't know. And so, but what's going to be great is when your county puts up a display, the next county is going to go, we can do that? And we have lost so much as a country to not have memoras up for Hanukkah, to not have our religious heritage is so important to our country, and to push all that into the closet is just the secularization of our landscape is why we've suffered so much. And if we can bring those values, those truths back, I just really appreciate you are the example for what we're hoping is going to happen this Christmas season all across the country. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kelly, for the people watching, just give a brief explanation of the Lemon test, because a lot of people say, well, what was that?
Well,
Case.
Lemon is a test 50-something years ago that I won't go through all the steps of the test, but it was based on this concept of the wall of separation. It led to all kinds of hostility to religion for 50 years. Over 7,000 citations to that opinion through the years. And in the Coach Kennedy case, they said Lemon is bad law, and they threw it out. And they said the test from now on under the Establishment Clause is it consistent with our nation's tradition and history? And if it is, it's presumptively constitutional. And so a lot of things that we've had since the beginning of this country that were taken out maybe in the 1960s or 70s from these bad cases following Lemon, that's not the law anymore. And so it's up to citizens to bring faith back in their community. They have the freedom now to do it. They just have to be willing to stand up like Phyllis did.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses. And just to build on what Kelly just says, it seems that one of the opportunities that we have as commissioners and one of our obligations as commissioners is to serve as educators as well, educators as to the demands of religion, because throughout the day we have heard about how so many do not really understand what the demands of faith actually are. And so often those in a bureaucratic role treat those demands as guidelines rather than rules, and as well as educators as to what the true relationship between American history and the fostering of faith has always been about, as the bishop referenced in the past. During Dr. Fox's moving testimony, referenced C.S. Lewis. I'm a big fan of C.S. Lewis as well. Not to be competitive at all, Dr. Fox, but I went to pay pilgrimage to the Eagle and Child, the pub where Lewis would read all of his writings to Tolkien. And of course, if I had to also support that institution by having a beer there, that was a sacrifice I was willing to make. But as you spoke, I thought of Lewis's a great work, The Abolition of Man, where among many, many other noteworthy quotes, he said that the task of the modern educator is not to cut down jungles, but to irrigate deserts. The right defense against false sentiments is to inculcate just sentiments. And it seems that having this commission, as we're prepared to mark the 250th anniversary of this country, provides us with the opportunity to rediscover American history itself. So thank you both very, very much.
Carrie, to your point, and I think it was either Reverend Graham or Dr. Phil in one of our earlier hearings about we need more combatants. I believe one of you said that to your point. And in the book of Jude, right before Revelations, I still love this phrase, Jude said we have to contend earnestly. I think I said it at that time, at that hearing. In today's parlance, it would be we have to fight for what we believe in. But from the very beginning, Jude said we have to contend earnestly to protect the church from what you talked about in the articles from the communists. It all comes back together. So this concludes the hearing. I want to thank again, Harlan, thank you for hosting us. Thank you so much. I hope we met the expectations that you had. Thank you. And I want to thank Lauren of your staff and your entire staff for letting us come in. I want to thank Mary, Margaret Bush, who is heads up our committee for us from the White House with Brittany Baldwin. Mary's parents are here, came in from Chicago. We need for you to move to Texas. That's what we need. And I want to thank all the witnesses. I want to thank all the commissioners because you came from all over the country. We had to reschedule this because of the government shutdown. So you had to all change your schedules. And so it's been wonderful. And Phyllis, you said you were just an average citizen. You're not an average citizen. If all of our citizens were as average of you, we wouldn't be here to have this hearing. So from all of us, Merry Christmas. Thank you for being here. God bless you all. And we will see you in the new year. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.